Lack of affordable housing is forcing more Americans to live out of their cars. A recent study found the number of people residing in their vehicles surged by 46% over the past year.
Millions of Americans are still going to work every day, but they're sleeping in cars at night. This isn't addiction. This isn't laziness. This is what happens when rent, fines, and towing punish people faster than paychecks can save them. And in 2026, it's getting worse. In 2026, having a job no longer protects people from homelessness. The core problem is simple math. Median rents in many U.S. metro areas now exceed $1,900 to $2,400 per month, while median take-home pay for service, retail, warehouse, healthcare support, and logistics workers often falls between $2,400 to $3,000 monthly after taxes. That leaves little or nothing after rent alone. Financial experts still recommend housing costs stay under 30% of income, yet millions are now paying 50 to 70%, making housing mathematically unsustainable. One missed paycheck caused by illness, reduced hours, or layoffs immediately creates arrears. Late fees compound fast, often $100 to $300 per month, pushing tenants further behind. By the time eviction filings begin, many households are already $3,000 to $6,000 underwater. Eviction records then block future rentals, even for people who remain employed. Unlike past recessions, this crisis is happening without mass unemployment first. People are working full-time, sometimes multiple jobs, yet still cannot meet basic housing costs. The disconnect between wages and housing didn't happen overnight. It built quietly through stagnant wage growth, aggressive rent hikes, and shrinking affordable housing stock. This is why car living has become a fallback. When income can't stretch to rent, but can still cover fuel, insurance, and food, vehicles become the last controllable expense. Housing didn't fail because people stopped working. Housing failed because work stopped paying enough to live. The path from housed to homeless has compressed dramatically. In previous decades, it often took years of instability. In 2026, it can happen in 30 to 90 days. A single event, job schedule cuts, medical bills averaging $2,000 to $5,000, or rent increases of 10 to 25% is often enough to collapse a household's finances completely. Once rent falls behind, eviction timelines move fast. In many states, landlords can file eviction notices after just 5 to 14 days of non-payment. Court dates follow quickly, and once a judgment is issued, tenants may have only 72 hours to vacate. There is rarely time to secure new housing, especially with damaged credit or eviction records that follow them for 7 years. At this point, most people don't go directly to the streets. They move into vehicles because it preserves mobility, employment, and some dignity. Cars allow people to keep working, keep children in school, and avoid shelters. But this transition is rarely planned. People sleep in parking lots, rest areas, industrial zones, or residential streets, often rotating locations nightly to avoid enforcement. What makes this collapse faster than ever is the absence of buffers. Savings rates for working Americans are near historic lows, with nearly 60% unable to cover a $1,000 emergency. Without emergency housing options or rent relief, the slide from apartment to car happens quietly and quickly, often before friends or family even realize what's happening to their loved ones. This crisis is not limited to expensive coastal cities. From 2020 to 2026, average U.S. rents increased by 30 to 50%, while wage growth for most workers rose only 15 to 20%. In many so-called affordable cities, rents jumped faster than in major metros due to migration patterns, investor buying, and limited housing supply. For example, a unit renting for $1,200 in 2020 now rents for $1,800 or more, while wages in the same area may have increased only $2 to $3 per hour. That gap alone represents an extra $7,000 to $9,000 per year, money most workers simply don't have. Compounding this is the loss of smaller, entry-level units. Studio apartments and single-room rentals have been converted into luxury units or short-term rentals. This removes the lowest rung of housing entirely. Waiting lists for subsidized housing often stretch 3 to 10 years, making them completely irrelevant during a crisis. Rent increases also trigger hidden costs, including higher security deposits, stricter income requirements often demanding 3 times the monthly rent, and higher application fees that can reach $50 to $100 per application. A worker earning $45,000 annually may be blocked from renting a $600 apartment despite being able to pay it historically. The result is a national affordability collapse affecting over 20 million renter households. Car living becomes not a choice, but a consequence of housing costs rising faster than the economy can absorb. Once someone begins living in a car, fines become a major destabilizing force. Many cities prohibit overnight parking, sleeping in vehicles, or staying longer than posted limits. Citations often range from $50 to $250 per safe violation, and they accumulate fast, sometimes nightly in enforcement-heavy areas. For workers living in vehicles, fines aren't just financial, they create cascading damage. Unpaid tickets lead to late penalties adding 25 to 50% more, registration holds, or license suspensions. A suspended license can mean lost employment, especially for delivery drivers, caregivers, tradespeople, and logistics workers who depend on driving for income. Some cities aggressively ticket specific neighborhoods, forcing car dwellers to move constantly. This sleep disruption reduces job performance and increases stress-related health issues. Studies show chronic sleep deprivation can reduce cognitive performance by 20 to 30%, directly affecting employment stability and decision-making ability. What makes fines especially destructive is timing. They hit when people have the least financial margin. A $150 ticket can be the difference between buying food, fuel, or paying insurance. Missed insurance payments. Risk policy cancellation, which then exposes drivers to even larger fines reaching $500 to $1,000. These penalties are rarely framed as homelessness enforcement, but that's exactly what they become. Instead of providing safe parking or transitional support, cities extract money from people who already cannot afford housing. This turns temporary car living into long-term homelessness through debt accumulation rather than recovery. Vehicle towing is one of the most devastating moments for people living in cars. Tow fees typically range from $300 to $700 upfront, with daily storage fees of $50 to $100. Within just 5 to 7 days, total costs can exceed $1,000 to $2,500. An impossible sum for someone already struggling. When a car is towed, shelter and transportation disappear simultaneously. Many workers lose access to their jobs within 24 to 48 hours, especially in areas without public transit. Missed shifts quickly lead to termination, turning a housing crisis into full unemployment. Once a vehicle is impounded, recovery becomes statistically unlikely. People often lack the cash, documentation, or time to reclaim it. After 30 days, vehicles may be auctioned or scrapped, permanently removing a person's ability to work, store belongings, or sleep safely. This is why towing is often the final step into street homelessness. Without a vehicle, people move into tents, shelters, or completely unsheltered conditions. Recovery becomes dramatically harder, with fewer job options and higher exposure to health and safety risks. Towing is not a neutral policy tool. It acts as a trapdoor. While framed as traffic enforcement, it functionally strips people of the last asset keeping them housed enough to work. Once the car is gone, the chances of escaping homelessness drop sharply, often permanently. Studies show that vehicle loss reduces housing recovery rates by over 60% compared to those who retain transportation. For many workers, car living looks cheaper on paper. Monthly, rent of $1,800 to $2,400 disappears, replaced by fuel, insurance, and basic food costs. In reality, the risks are extreme. Exposure to heat and cold is one of the biggest threats. Interior car temperatures can exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit in summer and drop below freezing in winter, increasing the risk of heat stroke, hypothermia, and respiratory illness. Safety is another major concern. People living in vehicles are far more vulnerable to theft, assault, and harassment. According to homelessness advocacy data, vehicle dwellers experience violent crime at rates 3 to 4 times higher than housed populations, yet rarely report incidents due to fear of police interaction. Health problems escalate quickly. Lack of consistent sleep increases the risk of heart disease by 20 to 30%, weakens immune systems, and worsens existing medical conditions. Basic needs, showering, using restrooms, preparing food, become daily logistical challenges, often requiring long drives and extra fuel costs. Car living also damages vehicles faster. Engines idle more, batteries fail sooner, and maintenance is often delayed due to lack of funds. A single repair costing $800 to $1,200 can end car living instantly. What appears cheaper is actually fragile. Car living works only until something goes wrong, and something always does. The danger isn't just discomfort. It's how quickly a manageable situation turns into a medical emergency, job loss, or permanent homelessness affecting over 2 million Americans currently living in vehicles. In 2026, many cities spend more money managing homelessness than ending it. Enforcement budgets for policing, cleanup crews, and surveillance often reach tens of millions annually, while permanent housing programs remain underfunded or stalled. Some major cities spend $50,000 to $80,000 per homeless person annually on enforcement, far exceeding the cost of permanent supportive housing. Encampment sweeps, parking enforcement, and vehicle citations are framed as public safety measures. In practice, they displace people without offering alternatives. When a camp or vehicle area is cleared, people don't disappear. They move a few blocks away, often losing belongings, documents, medications, and work equipment during cleanups. Cities frequently justify enforcement by citing complaints or sanitation concerns, yet fail to provide adequate bathrooms, trash services, or safe parking zones. This creates a cycle where conditions worsen, triggering more enforcement spending. Temporary programs dominate policy responses. Motel vouchers, short-term shelters, and emergency aid typically last 30 to 90 days, far shorter than the 6 to 12 months needed to secure housing in a market with extreme shortages. Once assistance expires, people are pushed back into vehicles or onto the streets. The system prioritizes visibility reduction over stability. Reducing the appearance of homelessness becomes the goal, not reducing homelessness itself. This approach costs more over time, increases trauma, and makes long-term recovery less likely. Enforcement doesn't solve homelessness. It spreads it thinner, deeper, and harder to escape. In many areas, actions necessary to stay alive are increasingly illegal. Sleeping in vehicles, resting in public spaces, or parking overnight can result in citations or arrest. By 2026, over 100 cities expanded ordinances banning vehicle dwelling or restricting it to limited zones. These laws disproportionately affect workers. Someone finishing a late shift may have nowhere legal to sleep. A single citation can escalate into warrants, court fees averaging $200 to $500, and criminal records, further limiting housing and job options. Criminalization creates a permanent paper trail. Even minor infractions can appear in background checks for 7 to 10 years, blocking employment in healthcare, education, logistics, and security sectors. What begins as a survival decision ends as long-term exclusion from the workforce. The financial burden compounds quickly. Court fees, missed work days costing $100 to $300 in lost wages, and legal costs add hundreds or thousands of dollars in debt. For people already living paycheck to paycheck, this debt is unpayable. Most importantly, criminalization discourages people from seeking help. Fear of arrest keeps individuals away from outreach workers, medical services, and support programs. Instead of stabilizing lives, the system drives people further underground. When survival is treated as a crime, homelessness stops being a temporary condition and becomes a permanent status enforced by law. Currently, over 30% of homeless individuals have pending legal cases related to survival activities, creating barriers that can last for years. Contrary to popular belief, many people living in cars are eligible for shelters, but choose not to use them. Shelters often separate families by gender or age, making them impractical for parents, couples, or caregivers. Others prohibit pets, which many people rely on for emotional support and protection. Safety is a major concern. Overcrowding, theft, and violence are frequently reported inside shelters. For workers trying to maintain employment, the risk of losing belongings valued at $500 to $2,000 or missing sleep is too high. Rules can also conflict with work schedules. Curfews requiring entry by 6 to 8 p.m., mandatory check-ins, and early wake-up times at 5 to 6 a.m. make it difficult to hold night shifts, rotating schedules, or multiple jobs. Missing a shelter deadline can mean losing a bed entirely. Shelters are rarely designed for long-term recovery. Stays are often limited to 30 to 90 days, after which people must leave regardless of housing availability. This creates constant instability rather than progress. Cars offer autonomy. People can choose where to sleep, protect their belongings, and maintain routines compatible with work requirements. For many, vehicles feel safer than crowded facilities averaging 50 to 200 people per location. Avoiding shelters isn't a rejection of help. It's a rational response to systems that don't fit the reality of working homelessness. Approximately 40% of vehicle dwellers have previously used shelters but chose cars as a more stable alternative. Living without stable shelter rewires how the brain functions. Constant vigilance, watching for police, theft, weather, or towing, keeps the nervous system in a permanent stress response. Cortisol levels remain elevated 2 to 3 times higher than normal, increasing anxiety, depression, and burnout. Sleep deprivation is one of the most damaging factors. Studies show that chronic sleep loss impairs judgment, memory, and emotional regulation at levels comparable to alcohol. Intoxication at 0.05 to 0.08 blood alcohol content. This makes job performance harder and decision-making less effective, even for highly capable individuals. Isolation compounds the damage. Shame and stigma cause many car dwellers to hide their situation from coworkers, friends, and family. Social support erodes, increasing loneliness and hopelessness. Mental health struggles often begin after homelessness, not before. The instability itself triggers panic disorders, affecting 40 to 60% of homeless individuals, PTSD symptoms, and depressive episodes. Without access to consistent care, these conditions worsen over time. This mental toll explains why escaping homelessness becomes harder the longer it lasts. The problem isn't motivation, it's neurological exhaustion. Homelessness isn't just a housing crisis, it's a mental health crisis created by instability, fear, and constant survival pressure. Research shows that every 6 months of homelessness increases the likelihood of chronic mental health conditions by 25%, making early intervention critical but often unavailable. By 2026, homelessness is no longer concentrated among single adults. Families with children and seniors on fixed incomes are increasingly forced into vehicles. Housing data shows that nearly 1 in 4 homeless individuals now lives in a family unit, and the fastest-growing homeless demographic is adults over 55, increasing by 48% since 2020. For seniors, the math is brutal. Average Social Security benefits hover around $1,800 per month, while rents in many regions exceed that amount alone. Even seniors who own vehicles outright are pushed into car living after rent increases of 15 to 25%, medical costs averaging $400 to $800 monthly, or the death of a spouse. Families face different pressures. Childcare costs averaging $800 to $1,200 per child per month can consume an entire paycheck. When rent jumps or hours are cut, eviction follows quickly. Living in a car allows parents to keep children in school temporarily, but stability erodes fast. Children living in vehicles experience higher rates of developmental delays, anxiety, and academic disruption. School districts report increasing numbers of doubled-up or vehicle-living students who remain invisible in official homelessness counts, estimated at over 1.5 million nationally. This shift matters because systems were not designed for these populations. Shelters, outreach programs, and emergency aid overwhelmingly target single adults. As families and seniors enter car homelessness, the system's mismatch becomes impossible to ignore. Car living is often described as a way to save up for housing. In reality, very few people escape homelessness this way. Basic survival costs eat away any potential savings. Fuel alone can exceed $250 to $400 per month, especially when constant relocation is required to avoid enforcement. Food costs increase without refrigeration or cooking access. Eating out or buying prepackaged food often costs 30 to 50% more than preparing meals at home. Gym memberships or truck stop showers add another $30 to $100 per month just to maintain hygiene necessary for employment. Vehicle maintenance becomes unavoidable. Tires, brakes, batteries, and oil. Changes fail faster when cars are used as living spaces 24 hours daily. A single repair averaging $600 to $1,200 can erase months of savings instantly. Meanwhile, fines, tickets, and administrative fees accumulate unpredictably. Missed insurance payments risk cancellation, while reinstatement fees can reach $500 or more. Most importantly, income instability increases. Sleep disruption, illness, and stress lead to missed shifts or reduced productivity. Even small income losses of $200 to $500 monthly prevent progress. Car living doesn't generate savings, it consumes resources. Without external support or systemic change, the idea of just saving your way out becomes unrealistic for most people. Studies show that less than 8% of vehicle dwellers successfully save enough to transition back into stable housing without additional assistance. The tipping point for many people is not eviction, it's enforcement. A single parking ticket can trigger a chain reaction. Unpaid fines escalate by 25 to 50% with late penalties. Licenses are suspended after $500 to $1,000 in unpaid tickets, and vehicles become eligible for towing. Once a tow occurs, recovery becomes statistically unlikely. Tow fees of $300 to $700, plus storage costs of $50 to $100 per day, quickly exceed $1,000 to $2,000 within 2 weeks. For workers living paycheck to paycheck, this is impossible to pay. Without a vehicle, people lose transportation to work, storage for belongings, and shelter. Job loss often follows within 2 to 5 days. What began as a housing crisis becomes total financial collapse. Even when people manage to retrieve their vehicles, the debt remains. Payment plans stretch for 6 to 12 months, siphoning income that could have gone toward housing. This process functions as a homelessness trap. Enforcement doesn't just punish, it removes the tools needed to recover. Studies show that people who lose their vehicles are 60 to 70% less likely to regain stable housing within 12 months compared to those who retain them. The system treats vehicles as violations rather than lifelines. Once that lifeline is cut, the chances of escape drop sharply. National data shows that only 15% of people who lose their vehicles to towing recover housing within 2 years, compared to 45% who keep their transportation. Official homelessness statistics severely underrepresent car dwellers. Most counts rely on shelter usage or visible encampments. People sleeping in vehicles, rotating parking spots, or staying out of sight are often excluded from counts, potentially missing 2 to 3 million individuals. Point-in-time counts are typically conducted once per year, often during winter, and rely on volunteers scanning limited areas over 24 to 48 hours. If someone moves locations nightly, they are easy to miss. School systems, hospitals, and employers often identify car living informally, but this data rarely feeds into official counts. As a result, millions remain statistically invisible. Undercounting matters because funding decisions rely on these numbers. Fewer counted homeless individuals means less federal and state funding for housing, outreach, and services. Current estimates suggest official counts capture only 30 to 40% of actual vehicle dwellers. This invisibility also shapes public perception. Car dwellers are framed as rare or temporary, rather than as a growing segment of the working poor representing potentially 15 to 20% of all homeless individuals. When people aren't counted, they aren't planned for. The crisis appears smaller than it is, delaying meaningful responses and allowing conditions to worsen unchecked. Some metropolitan areas have seen documented increases of 40 to 60% in vehicle living since 2020, yet official counts show increases of only 10 to 15%. Several forces converged by 2026. Housing supply failed to keep pace with population growth, creating a shortage of 3 to 5 million affordable units nationwide. Zoning restrictions limited multi-unit development, while investor purchases reduced available rentals by 15 to 25% in some markets. At the same time, pandemic-era protections ended. Eviction moratoriums expired in 2021 to 2022, rent relief programs closed, and emergency benefits disappeared. People who were barely surviving lost their last safety nets. Cities also shifted policy. Safe parking programs remained limited to 10 to 20 cities nationwide, while enforcement expanded. Towing, fines, and parking bans increased by 30 to 50% without corresponding housing investment. Inflation compounded the damage, higher food costs increasing 20 to 30%, fuel prices rising 40 to 60% from 2020 levels, and insurance costs jumping 25 to 40% reduced disposable income, leaving no margin for rent increases. These changes didn't happen independently. Together, they created a system where falling into homelessness became easier and escaping became harder than ever before. The result is a crisis affecting over 580,000 people on any given night, according to official counts, though actual numbers likely exceed 1.5 to 2 million when vehicle dwellers are included. Without intervention, projections suggest these numbers could double by 2030. The growth of car homelessness is not driven by individual failure, it's driven by structural imbalance. Housing costs exceed wages by 40 to 60% in most markets. Enforcement replaces support, and recovery pathways are blocked. As more people enter homelessness, systems become overwhelmed. Shelters fill to 95 to 100% capacity, wait lists grow to 2 to 5 years, and assistance becomes harder to access. This slows recovery and increases long-term homelessness. Children growing up unstable face lifelong disadvantages, including 40 to 50% higher dropout rates. Seniors lose health and mobility at accelerated rates. Workers burn out. These outcomes create higher public costs in healthcare, emergency services, and policing, estimated at $35,000 to $50,000 per person annually. Without affordable housing expansion, wage alignment, and non-punitive policies, car homelessness will continue to rise. The system is currently designed to manage homelessness, not prevent it. Until stability becomes cheaper than enforcement, this crisis will not reverse. It will normalize. Current trajectories suggest that by 2030, vehicle dwelling could affect 3 to 4% of American workers, transforming what was once an emergency into a permanent feature of low-wage employment. Prevention costs far less than management. Permanent supportive housing averages $15,000 to $25,000 annually, less than half of enforcement costs, yet receives only 20 to 30% of funding allocated to homelessness response. This crisis doesn't end on its own. It spreads quietly, one paycheck at a time. If this is happening in your city, or to someone you know, share your experience in the comments. And in our next video, we break down what happens when enforcement, rising fuel costs, and new laws collide, and why escaping car homelessness is becoming nearly impossible.